So, welcome to TC18 and welcome to the Administrator's Toolbox. We're going to talk today about the tools that you need to get data out of your server environments, all of Tableau's open source tools that we use to troubleshoot our own servers, and things that I use as a solution architect at Tableau Software to help customers solve their problems. As a solution architect in professional services at Tableau, I go on site with customers and help them plan out upgrades, plan out architecture changes, troubleshoot new and complex environments that they might have to work with. And these are all the tools that I use on a very regular basis. So we have a short amount of time today and a lot of tools to cover, and I really want to talk about every one. So we're going to touch on them briefly. We're going to do a lot of demos just to try to keep things moving. And then I'm going to point you to sessions later in TC that you can go learn more about the tools. So if something piques your interest, just wait until the end and we'll find a session where you can learn more about it. So quick agenda. We're going to hit the big ones first, the things you hear about the most. Tabon, jolt, Logshark. If we go to a toolbox analogy, this is your hammer, your screwdriver, and a bigger hammer. So we'll go through those first. We'll take a look at them and see what they do. We have some smaller tools that you may not have heard about, but have their place to help you dig into problems and learn a bit more. We'll go through each of those sort of one at a time. And then this idea of the toolbox. So as a best practice, it's a great idea to have all of these things ready before you need them. So having an administrative server that sits ideally in your data center near your Tableau server with all of these tools loaded, ready to go, means you're that much closer to finding the answers you need when problems arise or when you're trying to troubleshoot. So again, these are best practices. These are things that I use in the field, that my colleagues use in the field, and that we use internally at Tableau to test the product and do our own quality assurance and troubleshooting. So a few things to consider. Right now, our tools are Windowscentric. You can use them to gather data on Linux servers. So Tableau running on Linux is now supported across our heavy hitter tools especially, but they all run in Windows. That's going to slowly change as we continue on our Linux journey at Tableau, but at the moment it's a Windows box. 2 to 4 core is generally sufficient. You don't need a lot of horsepower for this. I like to use VMs. They're fine. Just carve out something in your VMware or Hyper-V infrastructure or AWS or Google Cloud. The more cores you throw at your toolbox, the faster it can do things like log processing. It's a little smoother, experience for you, but it doesn't have to be big or crazy with the horsepower. So, quick overview of what we're talking about today. All of these. So there's probably a few you'll recognize. Notepad++, many people have used that. Yeah, when Notepad's not enough, Notepad++. PostgreSQL, open source SQL database. Some of our tools use that on the back end, so that's something that will be installed by our tools on your administrative box. It's also kind of great to have a little database handy if you're trying to test out data problems or figuring out something maybe at an ETL level. All of our tools do center around Tableau Desktop. A Tableau Desktop does require a license. Hopefully, if you're in IT, you have a license available that you can use. But I always recommend having Tableau Desktop available on that admin box. That lets you do things like open up workbooks and troubleshoot them. If there's connectivity issues, if you're investigating performance issues, you have a place to go that's near your server and hopefully near your database to test out how fast something will load or how long a query will take to run. Database drivers and tools, again, that's very unique to your environment, so we're not going to cover any of those, other than oftentimes we see connectivity issues where maybe a driver version is not matching on a Tableau server. If your utility box lives near your Tableau server in your data center, ideally even on the same subnet, you can test out those drivers and load them in a sort of a non-production environment and start playing with them. So those are some of the side things that we recommend. All of the tools in orange are open source tools. I mean, Python's not Tableau, but yeah, it's open source. You can just download it and install it and play with it. So these are things that I like to have handy, things I like to leave behind when I visit customers so that they can get going. Oops. All right, so what are our heavy hitters? These are the big ones. Tab jolt. Plan out your environment, plan out your upgrades, plan out your growth. Tune your server. Tab jolt gives you a way to inject load at your server and see how it behaves. When does it break? If I add another node to my server, will I get the expected linear bump in performance? What if I have 4 VizQL processes instead of 2 VizQL processes? Tab jolt lets me ask those questions and do A/B testing to see how the server is going to act. Tabon. Tabons are Tableau sort of specific server monitoring tool. If you have tools like Splunk or Nagios or New Relic that's already doing your server monitoring, Tabon may not be something that you need. But if maybe you're a smaller shop or you're a one-person shop and you don't have access to really heavy server monitoring tools, Tabon's a step up from Task Manager or just running top. So we'll do a quick demo of that. And then Logshark. Logshark is amazing. If you call Tableau, how many people have talked to Tableau support? What's the first question they ask you? Send me your logs. The first thing they do when you send them those logs, they run them through Logshark. Logshark takes gigabytes of server logs potentially from every node in your cluster, tears it down, pulls out what's interesting, drops it in Tableau dashboards. So you can quickly narrow down problems and pinpoint, where do I look? Is the problem in viz rendering? Is the problem a certain time of day? Is the problem because the server's restarting itself? All of these things show up in Logshark. So I like that word demo. Let's actually take a look at it. So I'm on a little admin box that's hosted in AWS. It's a little M4, it might be an M4 XL, I think it's 8 virtual cores, not super big, it's about $1 an hour or so to run. You don't have to have a box that big, you could certainly have something smaller. And let's go into Tab jolt. We're actually going to kick a run off. So the Tab jolt installer is pretty easily guided. It installs Postgres for you, which is where Tab jolt stores its results. It'll also help you set up the connections to your server and build out an initial sort of test plan. So it queries your environment, lists off your workbooks, and so you can get started right away. Oh, you guys can't see that. There we go. Okay, so I'm on, again, a Windows server. I've already installed Tab jolt. This is my command line to get it going. So I've installed it, accepted the defaults, and then I go to my command line and I type go. And I type what kind of test I want to run. There are a couple of tests built in. There's a view test that just loads a workbook. There's an interactive test where it loads workbooks and then tries to apply filters, times how long that takes. And then there's a view and interact, which is a mixed test. My next option is how long do I want to run this test for? So I'm going to run this for 400 seconds. So it'll be kind of running in the background while we're talking about other things. And then this --C option is how many threads am I going to run? So this is, Tab jolt is a traffic injector, a load injector that opens up a lot of sessions on your Tableau server and just tries to take it down. A thread here is not exactly a person. Out of the box, Tab jolt immediately loads a viz, closes it, opens the next one, opens the next one. There's no pause between any of these tests. So out of the box, a thread is about 4 or 5 active sessions or users on a machine. So in this case, I'm testing for a box with about 20 people that are concurrently using it. You can adjust and tweak these tests. There's lots of settings, and there's several sessions today I'll point you to on this, so that this is closer to what an actual user, how an actual user would use Tableau. They'd open a viz, they'd stare at it for a while, and then they do something. But be aware, out of the box, Tab jolt doesn't work that way. Tab jolt just pushes requests to that server. And then I've given myself a note so I can find this later. This is going to go run a batch file. You're going to see error messages and Java messages. A lot of our tools are written in Java. And we don't worry about it. What I want to see is that my test run starts going. right there. So I just get a status indicator, and this is a good sign the tab jolt is running. It's injecting 4 threads of traffic for me. No errors, I like to see that. And I'm getting some response times. So these are in milliseconds, so my dashboards are coming back pretty quick. They're all cached. So 1 second, 2 second response times. I'm happy with that right now. But this is all going to drop into a database that I can explore in a viz in just a few minutes. And actually, we're just going to let this run. And let's see what that viz looks like. And that is right here. So it's called the Performance Viz. It's a workbook that installs with TabJolt, points itself automatically at your Postgres database, and gives you some really useful information about the results. My test runs are at the top, so this is 2 runs that I ran specifically against my Windows Tableau Server. I also have a Linux Tableau Server in my environment. I can also point TabJolt against that. That's a new thing as of last week. Another new thing as of last week is this supports all the way up to 2018.2. So if you've tried to use TabJolt with any of your newer versions, you may have run into issues with it. Anything post 10.5, it's all up to date now. Phenomenal. So what am I doing? Well, I'm comparing my runs against each other. I like to see a low error rate. In this case, my error rate's running about 5% for these tests. I'm kind of pushing these are super tiny VMs. I get an average response time. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll zoom in a little bit. This average response time is actually telling me not how long it took the viz to load, but how long it took that thread to do its job. So if I've added a think time to my test, that gets added onto my response times. If I'm doing an interactive test, it's inclusive of loading a viz and applying filters. So don't think of this response time as how fast my vizzes load. Think of it in comparison to my other test. So in this case, my test on the bottom, my average is about 2.3 seconds. My average on top is 4.4. Why are these taking twice as long? And if I scroll left here, oh, I almost doubled my number of threads that I was pointing at it. So when I double my traffic, things are slowing down. The other interesting thing that I see is total samples. So in 600 seconds, running 10 threads, I got 2,600 samples. When I added another 6 threads to that, I collected fewer samples. So my server's actually hit an inflection point where it can't keep up. It's queuing, but it can't it can't clear it. It's actually doing less work. So this tells me kind of where this box can be. It's not happy at 16 threads. It's a little bit happier at 10 threads. Just somewhere around 50-ish concurrent users if you use the out-of-the-box settings. I have a 2.5-hour session this afternoon on TabJolt, so this is kind of my baby. I love this thing. Love it. Again, cases for this, I'm A/B testing. Maybe my first test I'm running in 10.5. My second test I'm putting on my 2018.2 server. Maybe my first test I'm running against my on-premise VMs. My second test I'm running on my servers I've hosted in Google Cloud. My first test might be this. I want to double my user base. What's that going to look like if I double my traffic? TabJolt lets us answer those questions and then go explore. So I have a TabJolt thread running in the background. What is that kind of doing to my server? Well, we have a tool called Tabon, and let's go into that. Tabon is similar to TabJolt in that it's watching the server, but instead of looking at timings, it's gathering performance metrics. So either data from perfmon in Windows, or only perfmon in Windows. Tabon is a Windows Server only monitoring tool. It does not yet support Linux. It will one day. It also connects to a Postgres database, so it's storing, essentially it's taking perfmon data over time, as well as JMX data from the Tableau server, so Java Beans metrics that our server collects, dropping it into Postgres and giving us a database. This is live monitoring right now. So I can see that my server, this is memory. I was running some tests last night, making sure everything was working. So my available memory crashed because I was trying to see how much load I could throw at my server. It was sort of off overnight, so that was pretty good. And then when I booted it up today, it's been running, and I have about, I think, 10 gig free. This is a 16 gig server, not doing much right now. I could view my CPU. See, I was running some tests last night, and I spiked my CPU. And this is useful if you don't have an enterprise-level server monitoring tool. You can install Tabon, get it going, and look at your server metrics over time. One of the nice things about it is that it is specific to Tableau Server, so it looks at metrics the way we like to look at them. CPU use on a Tableau server is very peaky. It's very spiky. Dashboards load in 5 seconds. So my CPU will spike for 5 seconds and then go away. If you average that out over an hour, you may see, well, I'm only using 10% of my server's CPU, everything's great. But for those 5 or 10 or 20-second periods, you're using 100% of your CPU, which means maybe you need a little more headroom for those brief bursts of activity. So we show all of our data that way in smaller increments. This runs as a service in Windows, so it can monitor all day, all night, and collect metrics for as long as you want. I think the default's a 30-day rolling window, but all of that's adjustable and tweakable. All right, my next one is Logshark. Again, Logshark, I mean, TabJolt's my baby, but Logshark's my favorite. It's my favorite baby. Logshark takes a while to run. Its installer is very straightforward. It gives you MongoDB, which is the backend that it works on. And it used to be that it also needed Postgres to store its data. As of this week, it uses Hyper to store its data. So no more Postgres interactivity with it. What's great is that when I'm building my utility server with all of these tools, I no longer have 3 dependencies that all need Postgres that I have to deal with. I just have my 2, Tabon and TabJolt, that I have to get to play nice together. Logshark is now its own thing. So what Logshark does is it takes those logs, parses them for you, and gives you vizzes. Now that process takes a while, so I have a couple that I've pre-built here. When Logshark runs, it now outputs packaged workbooks with data in the Hyper format for every plugin that you run. Logshark has this concept of plugins, so if I only care about my Apache server, so the gateway on my Tableau server, I could run only the Apache login and or the Apache plugin, and it would just run through the HTTP logs for me. I like to run it with all the plugins because I want all the data. And if I'm willing to let it run for a couple hours, then I have all these avenues of data to explore, which is great. And that gives me a whole folder full of workbooks with things in it. Apache is always where I start though. I want to know how busy is my server? What are people looking at? In this log set here, I can see that my regional workbook is getting a ton of hits. So if people are complaining about that workbook, I need to see, is it well designed? Is it fast? And in fact, it's far and ahead my most popular workbook. If there's a row-level security on it, can I make that, maybe design it in a way so that the first view doesn't have to have a unique query so it can do better caching? Right? Immediately I'm starting to get answers and a profile of my server here. The next thing that's really cool in this Apache viz is this heat map. There's actually 2 views on here. So this top view is, this is 100% of the things going on at my server. So stretched up to 100%, this is a share of resources. Green things are fast, red things are slow. And I can set that threshold for what's fast and what's slow. And this is for everything the server does. Not just viz loads, but maybe showing a search page on the viz portal. So in the web interface, it could be sending a subscription. Every little process on the server, if one of them runs, I believe our default threshold takes longer than 5 seconds, we're going to call that slow. What I can see here is that for 1 hour of my day, half of the things going on my server were taking longer than 5 seconds. That's no good. People are going to start complaining. I also see that earlier, previous day, there were some things that were running slow. And what you want to see is just a nice balance, right? You want to see a lot of green, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red. But when I see these spikes, I know something happened at that point in time. At the bottom of this viz, I get an idea of my traffic. So this is how many events were happening at that time. Generally, there's a correlation between a tall bar and a red bar. In this case, they're a little bit off. This is simulated data. I was using jolt to kick off some server activity. So it's not aligned quite the way I'd like it. Because this is Tableau desktop, I can go in and actually tweak this. Maybe I don't want to see this granular to the hour. I want to see it down to the minute. And I can see, oh, that red spike, well, that was only for a minute or two. So there was maybe a whole team went in, an email went out and said, hey, go check out our dashboard. And then they all clicked at the same time. Within that same minute, they probably got a slower response because my server wasn't ready for it. A couple of other quick things in here. Again, Apache is where I always go first because it gives you that sort of profile of what's going on the server. Resource Manager. Tableau has some functions built into it to watch your server and make sure that processes don't run away with memory and bring your box down. And that's called the Server Resources Manager. This log will tell you, with this chart down at the bottom, whether or not it's going in having to restart services. So I'm running jolt against my server trying to break it. VizQL, which is our memory hog, memory and CPU hog on the system is VizQL. It's doing all the work to do your analytics. VizQL is getting restarted. jolt's throwing a lot of load. VizQL is ramping up, taking all the memory, and as soon as it hits a peak of 16 gigs on my box, SRM kills it so it doesn't take the whole OS down. So I have a whole bunch of restarts here where Tableau Server is just trying to catch up and trying to kill services so that the box stays up. The nice thing about Tableau Server is if you throw a lot of load in it, it tends to keep going, but you're going to get all of these restarts, which is probably going to end up in a bad user experience. But it doesn't go down. That's kind of cool. Another good place to check to see if you're overloaded or you're running out of resources, or if a service is maybe having trouble. So the last thing, and we're not going to really dive into it, but I'm going to talk about just the VizQL. If you want to trace a session end to end, so you want to see a user logged on, they loaded a specific dashboard, and then they called me and said, I had this experience with this dashboard at this time of day. The VizQL parser will let you go find that session, see what they loaded, and trace it as far as the queries that they were running. So it's like being able to run a performance recording, which you do in desktop, after the fact from your server. These workbooks are very powerful. This last one, it's called VizQL Server Performance. I'm going to zoom into that so you can see it. When you run Logshark, you have to request this workbook. It's not run by default because it takes a long time to parse. So there's an option called Plugins All that'll run that performance one, and that gives you a performance recording-like interface of every viz that's been run on your server in that log set. Really, really powerful tool. All right. We're going to get back to our deck here for a second. I have more to show you and not a lot of time. There. Okay, demo. Now let's get into the little detail, guys. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but I think they're worth looking at. Notepad++, again, Notepad's not good enough. If I need to edit one of my jolt config files, I need Notepad++. Personally, I like Sublime Text. It's not necessarily a free product, but I think there's a pretty good trial version. I like it because it's dark. Notepad++ is completely open source and runs well on Windows, really common, and a great editor. Now we have a tool, again, Logshark is my great tool, visual analytics on my logs. But suppose I want to dig into like my desktop logs. We have a tool called Tableau Log Viewer. This is posted up on our GitHub page along with our other tools. Tableau Log Viewer runs Windows and Mac, and it opens up And specifically, I use it for desktop logs. It can open server logs, but if I'm troubleshooting a slow-performing dashboard or dashboard that's weird, I gather my logs from desktop, which is that one log file in your documents folder, and TLV gives you this really nice view that breaks out all of the different functions that a dashboard needs to load. So things like parsing the query, compiling the query, drawing marks on the dashboard, connecting to the database, all of those details end up in that desktop log, and TLV just gives you a nice way of looking at it. And there's actually one more really cool thing that TLV does that I just have to show you because it's so cool. It's just so cool. TLV does not have an installer. You just download it and unzip it and off you go, which is kind of nice. Again, it's not really a text editor, it's a log viewer, but see if we actually load here. It's easy for that, particularly that desktop case. To get useful logs out of desktop, you need to run it in debug mode. There's a command line option for Windows and Mac to start Tableau Desktop in a debug mode that will give you more detailed logs. So if you're troubleshooting a dashboard and you're looking at the queries it's sending to your database and you're like, why is it doing this? Like, I really want to know, like, what's its thought process? You're really, really diving into something. That's where that debug mode in desktop comes in handy to give you really detailed logs for what is Tableau thinking. Not for the casual user, but it can be interesting. Let me get this open. I have a log set that I generated the other day. It's a full day's worth of data, so I have 3,000 different lines in here. Again, they're all categorized for me, so it's easy to parse through and find what I need. And there was a cool one in here. Let me give you the number, 3763. I'm going to scroll here, so. Okay, so 3763 is Tableau building out a logical query. And this is done in our logical query language. So Tableau says, I need to know how to draw this dashboard. So I'm going to build an abstract query, and then I'm going to send that off to Hyper or the data engine or one of our connectors to write this out into SQL. This is hard to read. I can't read this. It's not SQL, it's our own language. But there's this really cool thing built in called Visualize Query. What this tells me is how Tableau is thinking about running this query. Now this one specifically is doing some joins in the single query to get data from my dashboard. Now I know that there's no joins in my data source, but I also happen to know that there's some LODs, level of detail calcs, in that dashboard. So maybe these extra aggregate and join steps are slowing my dashboard down. Beyond that, I wouldn't use this, but it looks really cool. And if you really want to dig in and see what Tableau's thinking, how awesome is this? Okay. So a couple other tools. Again, I said Python. PowerShell and Bash are built into your OSs for writing scripting. Tab command is our command line interface to Tableau desktop style things when you talk to servers. So bulk adding users, exporting dashboards to PDF or to images in an offline manner. We have a tool called Viz Alerts that we wrote to make subscriptions a little more interesting. As well as you can trigger extract refreshes from the command line. So if you have an ETL process that you don't know when it's going to finish, you can chain that to a tab command that'll kick a schedule off when it's done. And again, you can write those scripts in PowerShell and Bash. I like to have Python because there's just so many extended powerful things you can do with Python scripting cross-platform. All right, we're going to hit on our last two. Scout and Replayer. Scout simulates a single user experience. So you could think of it as tab jolt that can only run one thing at a time, except it does more. Scout actually goes, opens up a browser, logs in as a user, sees how long it takes for that to happen. It tries to click some marks on the viz. It records those timings and then goes and loads the next viz. So Scout gives you a way to do things like user acceptance testing. It gives you a way to see what's the user experience like when my server's busy versus when my server's not busy. It lets you know, the really useful thing that I love about Scout is it lets you find those dashboards on your server that are bringing everyone else down. So if someone has a 2-minute dashboard out there, this will find it, because this can go through and click on every dashboard on your server and just tell you how long it takes to load. A replayer is a similar tool in that it's able to run through clicks that have been done on your server. So replayer is a Logshark plugin. Logshark takes your logs, parses it into a script, which is a JSON file, and then replayer runs that script in a browser, things that happened on your server. So we're not going to demo that one, but if I had a specific session, again, a user says, hey, I had a problem this time of day. You could run the logs through replayer, filter to their session, see what they clicked. Very cool. The even cooler thing is that as of last week, with our new releases of Tab Jolt, you can take replayer scripts and drop them in Tab Jolt and run that as your load. So if you have a production server today, you grab a script of what your traffic looks like for a day or for a week, and then you have Tab Jolt simulate that maybe on a new environment. Or you say, what if we doubled it or tripled it? I haven't used it in the field yet. Again, it's brand new, but it kind of makes establishing your baseline tests really easy. Again, replayer starts in Logshark as a plugin. You have to explicitly call it. Say, hey, Logshark, I want you to give me a replay script. And then you drop it in the replayer tool to connect it. So we are, if you guys want to hang out, I'll do a Scout demo, but I want to get to where we're going to send you next. Again, replayer and Scout. So getting them all to work together, we're just going to go through this. It's a lot easier now than it used to be. I recommend keeping your utility server as close to your Tableau server as possible. It makes opening things like ports easier. It gives you quick connectivity when you want to download logs. It makes your life easy to throw all these tools on one box. Take a picture of this if you want it. The slide deck will be available later. If you want Tab Jolt and Tabon to play nice together, I install Tab Jolt first, let it install Postgres, then install Tabon and uncheck the box to install Postgres, and then Appendix A of the Tabon installer runs you through how to get that Postgres set up to work with Tabon. You have to just go manually add a user and create a database for them. So those steps are in there. You have to install pgadmin to go edit that Postgres that it installs, and then you're good. They'll play nice. In a fallback, you can run the Tabon installer and have it install a second Postgres database. So you have two of them on different ports running, but this is the way to get them to play nice on one instance. All of your other tools now, Logshark has no more dependency. You can just install them. They all run together. Again, for the other tools, some of the other tools like Scout, Replayer, you do need that 64-bit Java VM, which you'll have to hand install. Again, all the tools live on GitHub. You can contribute to them. There's some subtopics that I didn't fill out. I apologize for that. Changes are on the horizon. All those changes are in as of this last week, and some of it even over the weekend. So where do you go to learn more? Ton of session on these this week. Server Tools 101 is today at 2:15. Similar overview to what we did, except they have an hour to walk you through it. Tuning Tableau Server. My friend Jonathan Varkovitsky does this. He is an escalations manager for performance cases at Tableau. He taught me everything I know about Tableau performance. He gives a talk on all of your tuning best practices. I cannot recommend that session enough. They're at the same time, so you have to make a choice there. Server Tools 202. This is the dev team that wrote TabJolt. We'll give you a little bit more of a hands-on demo, tell you more about the product features and how to use it. This is a great session. 203. If you want to know more about Scout and Replayer, the devs that wrote Scout and Replayer will give this session and tell you some more use cases and show you more about tweaking and configuring it. If you're doing large server installs, optimizing Tableau Server for high availability. So specifically, this is run by members of the dev team that work on high availability. Really great session. Deployment tips for Tableau Server. This is specifically cloud deployments. If you're interested in cloud deployments, that would be a good session to attend. And then a little plug for me. Today and on Thursday, I have a TabJolt hands-on training. They are standby room, but oftentimes people don't show up and you can maybe get in if you haven't registered for them. They're long, it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours, we do take a break. But it will be setting up your own tests and building them in TabJolt, running them on your own VMs that we have for the class, analyzing the results, and then a little bit of work in Logshark, a little more of a deep dive. A lot of theory in that session. Again, lots of conflicting times, so you're going to pick the ones that appeal the most to you. Thank you so much for coming to TC. Thank you for coming to my session, the first one. Thank you. If you get a chance, hit the app. Let me know what you thought. Loved it, hated it. I need to know so we can make it better. And I will do a little Scout demo as you guys are heading out, just because it's kind of fun.